morning, everyone. Welcome to UTL TV, which is the University Teaching and Learning TV channel, in which we produce issues of interest to higher education regarding teaching and learning. And as you know, this is the 11th conference of the higher education. And as part of it, we want to send out a strong message about good teaching, especially in higher education. So it's a very warm welcome on this very cold day in KwaZulu-Natal. Of course, as you all know, these studios are based at the Westfield campus of KwaZulu-Natal, the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So I want to kick off by starting off this panel of distinguished teachers and the director in charge of Distinguished Teacher Awards to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are located, and what do you teach?
So my name is Fatima Suleman. I'm from the discipline of pharmaceutical sciences here on Westfield campus at the School of Health Sciences. And I teach in the postgraduate program at the moment in the online Masters of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. And so I do a lot of virtual teaching in a way.
Oh, that's very interesting. Cecile?
Thank you. So I'm in the Graduate School of Business and Leadership at the Westfield campus, and I'm also teaching postgrad level, so primarily involved in teaching leadership and research to postgraduate diploma students, and also quite involved with supervision. Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Hi. I'm Rubby Dhunpath, Director of Teaching and Learning at UKZN and Chair of the Higher Education Conference. But on this panel, my role is somewhat different. I do not represent UKZN's Distinguished Teacher Award. I do, however, represent the National Teaching Excellence Award. I am the Council on Higher Education representative on the Teaching Excellence Award, of which many of our participants are, in fact, awardees. But I'll say more about that as we progress through the interview.
Thank you for that, Rubby. So, of course, I've heard you say earlier that teaching and learning in higher education are the foundational pillars of higher education institutions. And so I really want to get into the nitty-gritties of distinguished teaching. So starting off with Fatima, would you tell us what makes your teaching special or distinguished from, say, the rest of your peers? And of course, Cecile, you will follow up answering the same question.
You know, when I started off, I don't think I started off thinking that my teaching was distinguished in any way. My passion was all about the fact that as health science graduates, students were unable to access postgraduate programs because of issues of internship and issues of community service thereafter. Most of them were the first graduates of their family, so they had to earn an income and they couldn't come back full-time to the university. And so that's where my interest in online education began, being able to allow access to those groups of people into higher education and to postgraduate studies. And it's only when then I applied for promotion and I explained all of this and the philosophy behind it and my passion and what I thought I would try and achieve in terms of making the program based in kind of real world conditions that the health science students would face, that the promotions committee actually thought that that was something that was distinguished, and I was put forward at that point to be a distinguished teacher. So I think that most of us that get these awards don't think of ourselves in that kind of category. I think it's a passion to be able to do more and to do things differently and to excite people about learning and enhancing their skills, basically.
Okay. So Cecile, would you agree with that, or is there something quite unique to the way you teach?
I think it's quite similar to what Fatima said. So it was similar with myself in terms of applying for promotion. But the approach that I take, I've got postgraduate students who are from very diverse backgrounds. So they're coming from the public sector, from the private sector. They've got diverse qualifications. So some are from arts, engineering. So it's being able to bring them together and talk about leadership. And it's a very real subject. And it's the whole understanding that you're teaching adult learners. So I think that's one of the first things that I try to do is to understand their motives. Why are they studying? What is it that they're hoping to achieve from it? And then I think what I try to do is draw on the experiences as well, in terms of trying to promote collective learning, student-centered learning, and essentially I think trying to just aid them to be better leaders in South Africa to deal with the problems that we're facing. But I think it's similar to what Fatima said.
Okay, so that's really quite interesting. So Rubby, to pick up with you, Fatima spoke about online support for students and online teaching modes. From my own experience with the National Teacher Award, it seems like that's where their interest really lies. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, certainly. Actually, I brought along the criteria on which potential or prospective distinguished teachers are assessed. And essentially there are 4 broad categories. The first being reflection, that is the teacher's reflection on students. That is, who are your students? What kinds of knowledges do they bring into the classroom? What kinds of knowledges do they expect to take away? The next is a reflection on context. And good teaching is relative to the context in which it happens. And what happens at UKZN is not necessarily what happens in the context of Harvard or Stanford. The third category is a reflection on knowledge. And this links to issues of epistemology and ontology and recognition of different kinds of knowledges that exist or coexist in our classrooms. And the fourth category to which you allude with reference to technology is the reflection on growth. Many of us recognize that one of the institutions that very effectively insulates itself from progress is in fact higher education. Our classrooms are remarkably similar to what we had 200 years ago. And so an important indicator of a distinguished teacher's capacity is the ability to identify with the modern 21st century learner, the kinds of intelligences that this learner brings into the classroom, and how we appropriately harness those capacities and abilities and develop them. So an important indicator for the panel is how has the distinguished teacher been able to harness the affordances of technology in relation to what is inherently good teaching and learning strategies, that is, sound teaching and learning strategies underpinned by proven evidence-based pedagogies.
Oh, thank you for that. So, of course, Rubby's told us a whole lot, but of course we know that Rubby comes from an education background. And so I am really interested in knowing how, without that background, have you intuitively sort of formed this kind of relationship with your students who obviously have responded very positively to the way you teach? Could you say something? And then, Cecile, I'd really like you, because Fatima's spoken about the online platform, but for you to talk about what modes and means. Are you also into technology? Or so is it that distinguished teacher teaching is by this move towards new technology, as well as the relationship with your students? Before I take you, Cecile.
Absolutely.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Okay. So I think with myself, it's again back to the principle of adult learners, and possibly this is something that's open to debate, whether they do respond better to the traditional lecture, or if they are more keen on technology as compared, in terms of the traditional undergrad student. So I think for myself, what I've tried to do is use a blended approach. So traditional lectures, PowerPoints, but then I also try to bring in more interactive methods. So particularly simulations, role play, and also group discussions. Because I try to, essentially the way I teach, it's block release. So they're with me from a Monday to Friday. And I've got to make it as interesting as possible to keep the interest. So that's the approach that I take, to try and bring in a little bit of PowerPoint traditional lectures, and then some simulations, games, role play. And the whole point is trying to aid reflection and bring in their work experience, and then promote collective learning. So bring in discussions. How did this one feel? What did you learn from this process?
So not really the online platforms.
Not as much.
Much more interactive on the face-to-face kind of interaction.
Exactly.
And that's also been evidence-based there, Rubby, that it works. Fatima, how did you fall into online?
Actually, I did my PhD in the US, and I took a job to help pay my way through my last year of my PhD, and it was a teaching assistantship position at the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois Chicago, and it was for online modules. So I got my first taste there. And then I came back and I worked with another professor to put an AIDS Online International module together for the undergrad students, and it was just natural from there. But you know, I want to go back to just one aspect of it. So I don't see online teaching any differently from face-to-face, in the sense that you still apply the same principles to it. So even though it might be a virtual environment, you've still got to create the engagement with the students, the peer learning, interaction with the content, and the engagement of the content into real-life situations or case studies or their work environment. So you still apply the principles in that regard. And I think that that's the important thing to understand about the online learning, is that it's just a different form of technology to be able to use the same basic concepts that you would do with adult learning. So whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in a virtual environment. So my modules are all about weekly interaction with the students, whether it's in terms of assignments or case studies or quizzes and things like that. And you find that the students start engaging with each other. And a lot of them then end up exchanging cell phone numbers and WhatsApping each other off the platform as well, which creates more engagement. And the nice thing about it is, because it's an online environment that was first envisioned just for the South African health sciences students, it's become much more. It's become more continental, and Middle East is now engaged. So I've got people from Saudi Arabia and that in it as well. So it's opening up the world for the participants of the program to more different scenarios in which different things could work, and they can apply in their work situation as well. So that kind of peer engagement is actually really rare in large classes, unless you use some sort of other form of engagement. And so I'm enjoying that aspect of it.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So Rubby, in your office, realizing the importance of support and knowing the backgrounds of our students in higher education, certainly we have quite an older group, but we're also getting increasingly younger members of the community engaging in higher education. What kind of support can we offer for the different preferences, for those who want traditional face-to-face and those who want to offer online? So what does your office do?
Sure. And thank you for that. And I'm glad that both Cecile and Fatima were at pains to indicate that technology doesn't replace good teaching. That good teaching benefits from the affordances of technology, which is now pervasive. But the starting point is sound pedagogies, principles that have worked over the years. All of us have been beneficiaries of a technology-free environment, if you like, and I don't think we're any worse off. So the starting point is to cultivate sound pedagogic theoretical principles of what good teaching is in the context of a rapidly changing student population. So as the director of teaching and learning, I don't envision a time when technology will replace the university teacher. The university teacher will always be the anchor for good learning. What is now possible is that things happen at a much faster pace and at a much faster rate. And traditional approaches to accumulating large bodies of knowledge and reproducing them is no longer relevant. So what we have to do is create environments where we allow students, and for that matter academics, the space to use technology in the background, but we profile engagement as both Fatima and Cecile are using in their environments, where we use technology to be the enablers to provide the mechanism for students to engage collaboratively in peer review, peer learning sessions, collaborative learning sessions, where in fact students then become the evaluators of what is relevant knowledge in terms of their needs. So the flipped learning classroom is something that we are promoting quite aggressively now, where you have access to information. That information doesn't need to be the basis of engagement in a lecture room, which it currently is. That information is expected to provide the backdrop for aggressive debates, discussions, conversations that happen in the classroom, where the classroom then becomes a site for extending knowledge boundaries beyond the material that once was the focus of the attention of the classroom.
Okay, thank you for that, Rubby. So I want to pose the question to the distinguished teachers now. Yes?
I didn't quite answer your question.
Okay, that's fine. That's okay.
You asked what support my office... Yes, certainly. So
you spoke about the flipped classroom,
yes.
Right?
Now, it's interesting that the studio that you're sitting in was conceptualized for precisely that purpose, okay, to enable flipped learning, to enable blended learning. But the starting point, our principal point of departure was that what we don't want to do is make the studio a proxy for the classroom. In other words, where you simply replicate traditional lessons and put it online. That's not our view of online teaching or e-learning for that matter. We're saying that UTEL, UKZN Technology Enhanced Learning, must set the standards for what is excellent teaching. Teaching that is based on proven approaches, pedagogies, methodologies, approaches that have demonstrated success in terms of student success, student progression, and taking students to new heights of consciousness to be knowledge producers themselves. So the Util Studio provides this third space, if you like, for academics, yes, to put their material online, but then to use the benefits of modern technologies, social media, and the variety of different possibilities to enrich and enhance their learning. So academics wishing to be part of this exciting new opportunity simply have to call into the Util Studios, and we'll make that information available to the university community on our website. And you engage with a group of highly trained professionals who are able to translate traditional materials into technology-rich materials.
That's superb. So we shall take you up on your offer for that. So I want to pose a question to the distinguished teachers. You know, there's been so much student unrest in the country. Certainly with the kind of demands being made about changing the curriculum, about making sure that they get the kind of support in order to pass and so on. Has that in any way impacted on the way you're now delivering your lessons or the way you are constructing your teaching and so on? Or in other words, I'm asking, how are you factoring in the student demands in the present times? And it might be different because yours is a much more international audience and yours is a much more professional audience.
I can say, however, that once having received the distinguished teachers, a lot more people in the school and college have become interested in how online and e-learning could work. So, you know, it could work with undergraduate students in the sense that we use Moodle as an online learning platform, and you could do self-assessments there. So the students, before they come for their major assessments, can do self-assessments to test their own knowledge of the material so that they feel more confident when they come into to final exams. And I use continuous assessment because I really believe that, people perform differently with different exercises and different form of assessments. And the students tend to appreciate that as well, because if there's an event that happens in their life that makes them go missing for a week or so, it's not an additional pressure on them. And also because I think that when we go through life, we learn continuously. We don't have summative and formative assessments in our lives as well. So that approach is slowly changing, I see, with the undergraduates and the postgraduates as well. So I think that people are slowly coming to realize that there are benefits to using e-learning. But I think for the students themselves, supportive material on the platform, ways to do self-assessments before they get to final exams, ways to practice their understanding and their application of the knowledge is perhaps the most essential. I will bring in one other point because I have links with Utrecht University in the Netherlands and with Drake University in the US. And I'm struck by the way those universities are also structured, because we tend to be an 8 to 5 university. And I mean, I think the GSB is different because they have postgraduate programs that end quite late. But these are undergraduate students that are there till 9:30, 10:30 in class. And I mean, I did lectures for both universities that finished at 9:30 in the evening, and the students were around. And that caters for a group of students that want to be able to work in order to support themselves, but take courses to be able to complete their degrees as well. And I think that the South African higher education institutions are going to have to start thinking about the fact that universities should not be a 9 to 5 open door aspect, but actually is learning all the time.
So what about our contextual factors? Transport, traveling at night, and so on. So there are specific peculiarities in our context that might mitigate against such. But I do know that our libraries are open till quite late, and certainly in the School of Education, I have certainly seen students working till late at night. So, but I think you're speaking about lectures continuing way beyond. And it's something we might have to consider in view of not having enough teaching space.
Well,
Rubby?
Yes, absolutely so. And I think Fatima's experience with these two universities indicate to the value of blended learning, that the contact face-to-face traditional classroom approach is but one in the continuum of different opportunities. And yes, the university should be accessible at all times, but it should also be accessible in other forms. Yes. We should never reach a situation that we had last year at UKZN where we had long periods of shutdown. That should never happen, because we have the technologies to ensure that it doesn't. And blended learning has the pristine advantage of allowing students to progress at their own pace, to allow some students to accelerate their progress and move on. And for those who have multiple interests and obligations, they should be allowed to progress through their studies at a different pace.
So are you in some way suggesting that those who are really accelerated learners can finish their degree in less than the prescribed times?
Well, hopefully we are beginning to become progressive in that regard. In fact, when we talk about transforming the curriculum, that's where we should start. We should start by asking, why do we need 3 years to finish an undergrad degree and 10 years to finish a doctoral degree? Is there any logic underpinning those rigid time frames? Or is it simply us recycling rituals of practice that we've inherited over the years? And is it possible with technology to change that entirely?
So if I can, we have a pilot project in the College of Health Sciences called the Student Enrichment Program that was started a while ago, where very bright students in the college could apply to do some of the online master's modules non-degree while they were doing the undergrad. And we've just had a successful medical student who's completed all his courses and has actually done his research and published a paper. And we're hoping to get him registered for a dual degree. And I think that it's not everybody, but there are that top percentage of students. So when we talk about support, we tend to think about people who are struggling, but we also have to talk about people that are excelling, like Rubby has mentioned, and that they need that additional impetus and momentum to go through and become the leaders of their generation, both in terms of education and research. And these are ways that we could actually help to facilitate that.
Okay. So, Cecile, mastery of content, is that what we are moving towards? Because I'm wondering, to go back to the issue that students are raising, and it seems that there is this demand that we want to get access, but we don't only want access, we want success. And success is measured by getting a certificate. But are we integrating the deep critical thinking skills, and how do we fit that into our programs?
Look, I think with the working students that we have, so it's and it's an interesting mix. Some of them are managers and leaders. Some of them are aspiring to be in those positions. And some of them have management qualifications, and others maybe come from engineering, or a teacher is now principal and they don't know how to manage people. So I think from the interaction that I've had with my classes, it's that emphasis on skills, and they actually want actual practical guidelines. Quite often they'll tell you straight, oh, there's too much theory. They'll be quite straight and say, oh, this theory is too Western. You're talking to me about leadership in Europe or leadership in America. How does it work here? And I think it's with us, it's a case of having to engage this local context that we find ourselves in. And I think from my perspective, I'm not an expert. That is my approach with them, that they are coming with real world experience. I can facilitate to them, but I think it's a case of taking what they bring to the classroom as well and engaging in that collective learning. So quite often students will engage in group discussions and say, oh, is that how it's done in your organization? And then they'll start sharing. So I think it's not just content, but it's very much about the practical real world skills. When they leave the classroom, how can they be better practitioners? How can they deal with the challenges that we face in the country? And that's on the leadership side. And then there's also the research. So for many students to realize that we teach practitioner research. So how can they effect change in the workplace, the context that they are in? There may be a small scale problem. So teaching them that they can actually address this problem and effect change themselves. So,
okay. So we have a situation then that's in your it's at the Graduate School of Business, right? That the content is sort of catering to a specific need that is identified. My question then is, how then do we integrate what we want from them as as a higher education institution, this critical thinking skill in which you just don't consume knowledge and apply it in practice. But how do we start beginning to think? Because if we think about leadership in the country and what's happening there, is it just leadership in practice? And how do we get even these managers and leaders all over to start thinking differently? And so that's quite a challenge. Fatima, any ideas around that? Because even in pharmacy, right, it's not just giving out the medicine.
So part of what we do in our module is reflective practice. So they look at what is happening currently in their work environment and they critique it. And they look at applying other factors in that. And as a kind of ad hoc evaluation feedback, most of the employers have said that the people who have done the modules have actually gone on to then create interest in the others to kind of monitor what's happening and create change. So there have been changes in the practice in those institutions, and they're becoming more confident to do things like ward pharmacy or take leadership on antibiotic stewardship and so forth. So I think it's not just about the consuming on content and collaborative practice, but it's within those modules giving them tools to critically look at their practice and to do reflection of practice, and then look at how things can be strengthened and where the gaps and weaknesses are. And slowly but surely, these people are moving up the ranks as well. So most of my graduates have become leaders in their positions, and hopefully are then is this knock-on effect going on. But I think you're right. As a higher education institution, we're not just about practice. We're about that critical ability. We're about leadership. We're about research and evidence. And that's what we try to do in all of these scenarios, is to be able to say that even within your small institution, small company, small workplace, small office, there's data being generated that you can use to inform change or to support change. And that's what you need to do. And I think that's what we're sort of saying as a higher education institution, is that yes, you create these contextualization factors, you create the localization, but you always introduce a section on critical thinking, critical problem solving, and monitoring and evaluation, and evidence generation.
So, Cecile, are students changing the nature of the institution?
Our institution.
Yes.
I think
we're research-led intellectuals,
yes,
supposed to be, doing much more of the thinking, but are students pushing us?
I believe they are. Certainly the professionals that we're teaching, they're quite informed, they've got their opinions. And I think to add on to what Fatima said now, it's not just content, but also it's about professional development, individual development, change. And I think from the student's perspective, if I can give you an example, in terms of the leadership theory, this year in one of the classes that I taught, we had a big argument, a little debate about leadership in Africa or African leadership, and it led to the whole Ubuntu debate. And I think that also then gave me some ideas for some sort of research that I could engage in. And I also then took the opportunity to encourage them that when they do masters, I think they can then contribute to the field, because the reality is that there is very limited theory studies that have been done. So I would definitely say the professionals that we are teaching most certainly do give us input as well.
So Rubby, how are students and lecturers changing the nature of higher education?
Well, certainly, academics enjoy a certain degree of autonomy that very few other professionals do. Regrettably, though, many choose not to exercise the autonomy. And the autonomy lies in various components of the curriculum, in all of its manifestations, but particularly about what to teach and what not to teach. And now more than ever, we need intellectuals who have the capacity to distinguish between what is valid, which is legitimate in an area of things that are constructed and fake parading as legitimate. We need to vigilantly, as academics, be able to cultivate that awareness about what constitutes legitimate and profane knowledge. So with that in mind, we have to open up our classrooms. We have to relinquish some of the power and control that we do possess as academics, and enter the minds of our students to ascertain, so what decisions are they making, and from what standpoint? What do they admit and permit in their consciousness about what constitutes legitimate knowledge? We've seen a really painful slide towards anti-intellectualism the world over, probably more pronounced in South Africa and the United States than elsewhere in the world, and epitomized by the leaders of these countries, regrettably. And of course, we are told constantly that you get the leaders you deserve. So why is the populace deserving of this kind of leadership when they in fact have a choice to make other choices and they're not exercising it? So there must be something patently wrong with how we activate students' awareness and consciousness in our classrooms, and we have the ability and the scope to change that.
So the question I want to drive at now is, are students the best persons to tell us what should be in our curriculum to teach? Fatima?
I think it's a bit of both. I don't think that they completely can change the curriculum, but I think they can definitely indicate where they are dissatisfied with content in the way maybe it's delivered or the way it's contextualized, in order to make it more relevant for them for learning. So I think in that way that's accepted. But I don't think that they can completely change it, because there's also a sense of core knowledge that needs to be imparted and shared and delivered and attained before that critical ability and that thinking can be done. But I agree with Rubby in the sense that our classrooms have to be open to kind of this debate and this discussion and this negotiation. And it can't be the old method of, I know I'm the best, I'm the expert, and you will listen to what I have to deliver. So I think there's a bit of both, and I think that's the change that's happening at the moment.
Cecile?
I think it's also leading on from what she's saying, sort of understanding that we do factor in what they are saying. They're coming with sort of real-world expertise. And in a sense, especially the ones I'm teaching, that's the perspective of industry. So I think it's quite valuable also from the university's perspective, engaging with industry, engaging in partnerships and getting an understanding of what's important in the real-world workplace. And of course, it's slightly different because it's not undergrad that I'm teaching where we're strictly preparing them for the workplace, but we're developing those work skills. And I think it's continuous development, trying to do better, thinking differently. So I think from my side, it's really, I've got them firsthand, the business students, those from public sector as well. And as I said, quite often I start by trying to understand where they're coming from. What is it that they want to do when they walk away? Some of them will say, well, I want a promotion, so I need this. They'll be quite honest. And others will say, well, I'm lacking, I don't know how to manage people. I studied something in engineering, or I was a teacher and now I'm a principal. So I think it's just to understand where they're coming from, and I suppose as an academic to be flexible in our approaches as well and support them and engage.
So back to the Distinguished Teacher Awards, Rubby. My question to you is that we have a large staff complement at UKZN, and we offer a maximum of 4 annual awards. But in many years, it's just 2 persons who get it.
Correct, yeah.
Is there any explanation for why so few people match the criteria and the high standards required by UKZN?
Yeah, I think you've answered the question really. It's about the high standards, but I think it's more than that. I think too few academics apply for the award, and that's due to a number of factors. And possibly the most daunting is developing that teaching portfolio, which is the basis, the cornerstone of whether you are admitted into the race or not. And of course, we've demonstrated recently that it is in fact less daunting than you imagine it to be. And in fact, we do offer training sessions on how to develop a teaching portfolio. We've also tried alternative approaches to opening up the award. We now encourage college awards, which has become institutionalized, and down to discipline-specific awards to increase the pool of potential applicants for the University Award and, in fact, for the National Teaching Excellence Award. So we're hoping that over the years, all of these alternative remedies will result in a bigger pool of applicants and, in fact, a bigger pool of awardees. We, in fact, have the same problem at the national level, the fact that we have too few applicants. At the national level, we have barely 100 applicants, which says something about, well, I don't believe that the rigor of the process should change, but what we should be mindful of is that if the process is inherently alienating, we need to remove those factors and create opportunities for more individuals to be confident to be able to apply for the award.
Thank you for that. So maybe just to do the last round of questions is, as distinguished teachers and as the Director of Teaching and Learning, what advice would you give, if you could, to a novice lecturer just entering higher education about becoming sort of distinguished in their teaching, not necessarily for the award, but to be a good teacher?
try different approaches till you find the approach that works for you in terms of engagement, student participation, and the kind of success that you want, and document it. I think that we're very bad as well about documenting how the different approaches have changed things and how students like it. So we're a research-driven institution, and part of it is also research and reflective practice of our own teaching. And I think that is what I would advise someone coming in, is that try case studies, try team-based learning, try e-learning, see what helps you get the most out of your students and yourself, and that you find passion in. But document all of those experiences and then write up on it.
I would agree, and I would also argue that it's very valuable to be mentored. So I was quite lucky when I started. I was mentored by colleagues in the Leadership Center, and I think that was quite valuable because they gave me great insight into teaching adult learners. And they shared their teaching with me as well. So I think it's learning from one's colleagues as well. There's best practice out there. And I think also having attended some courses at UKZN as well, because I don't come from an education background, but I think that was quite valuable just to expose me to that side of things as well.
Rubby?
Yeah, let me be controversial. And let me say, for a young teacher, university teacher, you should ask the question, am I teaching the way that I was taught at school? Or by my university lecturer when I was an undergraduate student? Or as Dan Lottie would say, are you a victim of the apprenticeship of observation? If so, you're doing a great disservice to yourself. Let's not talk about what you're doing to your students. And to ameliorate that identity crisis, I would say, let's embrace the principles of the scholarship of teaching and learning. And the scholarship of the teaching and learning says simply that in the same way that you research your disciplinary knowledge, you have an obligation to research your teaching. And in order to do that, you need to document what you're doing and subject that to scrutiny, subject it to a peer review process. And also, you need to open up your classroom doors beyond your students to your colleagues. University classrooms are private spaces. That's almost that's an antithetical to the notion of a university. So opening up our teaching spaces invites possibilities for radical transformation of those spaces. And then the third, for me, important indicator outcome is writing about your teaching. And that's sort of part of this loop of the scholarship of teaching and learning, sharing your practice with colleagues, having that interrogated, critiqued, with a view to improving your practice and becoming more relevant as a teacher.
So, you know, Rubby and I co-edit a special edition each year on higher education teaching and learning. We expect to see your manuscripts very soon as part of that project of getting everything documented, published, and of course, before it gets published, to be scrutinized by peers in the field of teaching and learning. So we're looking forward to getting those manuscripts from you. So finally, I think we've had quite a good discussion around teaching and learning, and less about distinguishedness. But I think we all agree that good teaching and learning leads to that path, because the Distinguished Award is really recognition for outstanding teaching. So I want to wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors as you move towards more online and you move towards more practice-based. And Rubby, of course, we're expecting much more from your office, as is the norm and standard. You set a very high standard for universities, and I think we are taking the lead in really pushing for quality teaching and learning that is contextually based, relevant, and embraces the 4 knowledges that you mentioned earlier. So thank you very much for that.